Okay, it is 6:30. We'll call this meeting to order and welcome everybody here this evening and acknowledge that the city of Winkler is situated on Treaty 1 land, the home of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that have been made on these territories and acknowledge there have been harms and mistakes in the past, but we dedicate ourselves to a future based on respect of all peoples, including Indigenous communities, in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration, moving forward to a harmonious, prosperous future together. Be it resolved that the agenda for this regular meeting of council on January 28th, 2025 be adopted. Mover?
Andrew?
Second.
Oh, Marv's online?
Marvin is. If you're watching, you will note that Marvin is not sitting to my left, but he is joining us virtually this evening. Thank you, Marvin. Any additions or changes to the agenda as presented? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Thank you, Marvin. Be it resolved that the minutes of the regular council meeting of January 14th, 2025 be adopted. Mover?
Peter.
Second.
Ryan.
Any questions or comments on what you see? All in favor? Carried.
Yay.
Be it resolved that accounts payable in the amount of $2,046,696.11 as approved by the Finance Committee be approved for payment. Mover?
Andrew?
Second.
Don.
As always, your check register is attached. Any questions on what you see? All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Be it resolved that the utility rate pass-through bylaw number 2331-24 be given first reading. Mover?
Andrew?
Marvin.
Second. Marvin got the second. Andrew's got the first. Jody, this is specifically...
PBM.
This is often something that is limited to the pass-through from our water, which we purchase from PVWC. We purchase about 30% of our water through them and generate the other 70% through our water treatment plant. This includes their increase rate as well as the increase that was approved in our utility rate review as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions? All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Be it resolved that the minutes for the police board meeting of January 14th, 2025 be adopted. Mover?
Andrew?
Second.
Don.
Those minutes are attached. Andrew, is there anything particular we should be aware of or take note of?
No, it's overall the year, if you say that's successful. I mean, we're under budget. Most of our calls for service are actually down other than some traffic calls increase, but that was due to some MPI initiated calls, I guess. So, but otherwise, nothing too urgent or shattering there.
I thought,
Just to add, sorry, the
please.
MPI calls that Andrew was referring to is MPI funded programs. So that amounted to about 800 hours worth of our officers' work on traffic enforcement in Winkler. So that's
That they pay
that's
for.
really good. That MPI pays for.
Excellent. I think, too, when we look at a rapidly growing community as we are, to be in a situation that our violent calls go down, I would agree that that would be a success any way we look at it. Any additional thoughts or comments?
Oh, I think, Marvin here, I think that part of the success can be attributed to some of the other initiatives that council certainly supports, like Central Station and so on, where people get needs met so that they don't necessarily turn into devious ways of trying to meet them.
It's a good point, because, yeah, we see that in other overall calls being reduced in certain categories, so.
Excellent. Not seeing further comments. All in favor?
Yay.
That is carried. Be it resolved that the swamp minutes be received for information. Mover.
Peter.
Second.
Michael.
Thank you. Peter, anything that you'd like to note there?
Successful 24. We made some money, put some in the bank.
Ooh.
So that's good. Looking forward to a new and improved 25.
And nice to see that the composting plans continue there.
Yeah, we've applied and we have taken a consulting firm. We've hired them to help us with the applying for the permits and getting that rolling, so.
Nice. And I note that we already have interested customers potentially.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Ophal's still going well, too?
We're taking lots of special loads. Yeah,
It's good,
and that's where the extra revenue comes from.
right?
Excellent. Anything further? All in favor?
Yay.
And that is carried. Be it resolved that the minutes for the Planning Committee meeting of January 14th, 2025 be adopted. Mover.
On Friesen?
Second.
Peter?
Ryan just beat you, Peter.
He's quick,
He is quite that new guy, isn't he?
smooth.
Anything there that we should note of in those minutes?
Well, just some housekeeping stuff, but, you know, another task we always are working on, or our staff is working on, is trying to, you know, secondary suites now, and how do you implement them into whether it's multifamily or single family, and then it's, you know, because we live in Manitoba, it's snow removal, and where do we leave the snow and some of those things, so it's always a challenge, but trying, you know, to accommodate and try to get more affordable housing.
And it is quick that we notice unintended consequences of changes. And then one of the keys is when we do notice some of those is to make sure we react to them in a way that allows the community to continue to build out, but that we build good community.
100%.
Not seeing anything further. All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Be it resolved that the minutes for the Community Services Committee meeting of December 18th, 2024 be adopted. Mover.
Andrew?
Second.
Michael?
Thank you, Michael. Anything there we should be aware of, Andrew?
Nothing too crazy there. We discussed some of our rate increases for next year, and most of them are around the 1.3%. Do those need to come through fees and charges, or that just,
They'll come through fees and charges, yep.
okay, so that, how often do we renew that? Every year, once?
Depending on when departments do updates, we often have multiple per year.
Okay. So these rate increases, like, for instance, the arena will only take an effect September 1st, but we discuss it in December, so,
To give ourselves plenty of time to make sure that we're able to move forward when we're there.
correct.
Well done, thank you. All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Be it resolved that the South Central Regional Library Winkler Branch meeting minutes for the November 18th, 2024 meeting be received for information. Mover?
Marvin.
Second.
Ryan.
Thank you very much, Marvin, for agreeing to sit on that committee until we have somebody more permanent to place there. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or comments on the minutes that are in front of us.
Well, I think I can echo former Councillor Don Ferry's comments. I'm so impressed with the many, many different types of activities that are drawn in by people, and all at no or very minimal cost. So it's actually a truly a place where anybody from the community is able to go to.
Excellent. Thank you, Marvin. Any other questions or comments from council? All in favor?
Yay.
Carried.
Mr. Mayor, This next item, I do not have a conflict of interest in, but the public would perceive that I do, so I would like to ask to be excused.
Excused, and I'll ask the minutes to show that. On that note then, be it resolved that this regular meeting of council recess for the purpose of holding public hearings. Mover?
Peter?
Second?
Michael?
All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. That then takes us for public hearing for bylaw number 2329-24, which is the rezoning of 675 PTH 14. Jody, if you would bring us up to speed and get us going.
Sure. As always with our public hearings, we'll go through some of the information, then the mayor will invite input from anyone who wishes to speak in relation to the application. Those comments should be from the podium as we stream our meetings and want to make sure that everyone's able to hear what's happening and that you would direct your comments towards the mayor. So this application is from owner and applicant 2117983 Manitoba Limited. And it is, as mentioned, a rezoning application for what is described as 675 PTH 14. And just, there's a map there. This is just to the north of Highway 14 in the area where our KFC and Wendy's is located. So that area is currently zoned as DR, which is Development Reserve, and the application is to rezone that to CG, which is Commercial General. And we have no written objections to this application. We do have a rather robust report to council that you've
Yes, you
had
do.
a weekend to digest. And I will defer to you, Henry, to whether or not you want me to summarize or comment any of the report or just move into the public hearing.
I suggest that we'll move into the hearing, and before we close, I'd ask you to summarize
Sure.
the report to council as well, if you would.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, we will then open it up to the proponents if they wish to bring some comments to it. And I'll ask you when you get to the microphone to introduce yourself, please, for the record.
John Fraze, 2117983 Manitoba Limited.
Evening, John.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Council. We made application to zone this property to commercial. I will keep this short and say shorter than the document, this 22-page document that I have that has all kinds of conditions, and I could actually stand here and read it, and maybe everybody could now know what goes into a document like this. I'm not sure you'd be in favor of that.
We've had opportunity, well, some opportunity. We received it on Friday and have waded through it now, but there is 23 minutes or 23 pages of lots of information.
I would say council should look at this. The neighboring property is zoned commercial. It touches my property there. It has the same development plan, it has the same MSDW development plan, and the Winkler secondary plan as mine. I would ask that you change mine to commercial.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any questions of the proponent before we open it up for others to speak? I don't see anything here. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this development? Not seeing anything further. Jody did reference, and as did John, that there is a significant report to council attached here with quite a few considerations. And if you don't mind, Jody, maybe just walk us through that condensed version so that just we fully understand what we're looking at.
Sure. So maybe I'll just start with the intent of the application as is written in the report. It's the developers have long-term plans for this larger site, which include a mix of retail stores transitioning to apartment buildings towards Northlands Parkway. So it's a bit of a transition as you move from south to north there. from commercial to residential. And yeah, they submitted this rezoning application accordingly to change it from DR to CG. They have, if you look previously, you'll see lots, we call this Lot 2. Lots 1 and 3 have been, they were created through a subdivision which happened in 2022. So, as was mentioned, when we get an application like this, we look at the different layers with which we have to evaluate the application. So, and maybe we just start with the development plan. So MSTW, as our planning district, owns the development plan. And the first thing we do as staff is check to make sure that a proposal meets up with that plan, which in this case, it does. And while there is a development plan review in progress right now, it's not going to impact this, this application in any way. And just, by the way, as I go through this, I may ask for some help from some of our staff. That would likely include Stephanie Jantz, who's our planning and permitting manager, and then Tim Weeb, who would represent the engineering side. So after the development plan, we look at the secondary plan, because the layers with which these plans operate are kind of a hierarchy. So your development plan sits further at the top, and then you have a secondary plan if one exists, and then underneath that is your zoning bylaw. So we've passed through the development plan side of things. We look at the secondary plan. So our secondary plan is a bylaw, which was put in place and sort of broadly designates what council of the day approved in different parts of the community, of our outlying undeveloped areas of the community, to provide some direction for staff and developers in doing long-term planning. And those plans can change, you know, like, just like a rezoning bylaw. Here we have an application for a change in the zoning bylaw. The same thing can happen. An application can be put in to change the secondary bylaw to also fit in accordance with changes of plans. Like there's changes in market conditions. You know, when you put a bylaw in place like that, you can't predict the future. So we, together with our stakeholders, you know, at that time, landowners and developers worked together to try to figure out best guess at the future. And then if market conditions change, we realize that the secondary plan may need to change. In our secondary plan, the way it exists today, this area was in an area called neighborhood center. And so there's some information about that in terms of what is the intent of a neighborhood center, and, you know, does a given application comply with that intent. In this case, it's a little bit hard for us to evaluate, because we're not, and nor I think is the developer, 100% sure what all of this land is going to look like. So they're applying to rezone this. They have some preliminary plans, you know, for large retail, but they don't know necessarily how the rest of it is going to look. So that makes it difficult for us to come to you and say, this will comply with neighborhood center or not. So it's possible that it could require a change to the secondary bylaw. So we've given you some information there about the secondary plan requirements for neighborhood center. And, you know, while if we have this as commercial general zoning, it does provide the environment to meet the requirements of neighborhood center, but it really depends on how it gets planned out. So there's a couple options. You know, the plans would have to fit that, or we'd have to see an application for a change. Have I kind of hit that pretty good? Okay. As far as so that's the secondary plan. As far as the zoning goes, just a note, like right now, I think it's still, there's some agricultural operations that have been going on to date. That would not be allowed under the CG. because, you know, it's considered to then be eminent development. And so we wouldn't, at that point, it wouldn't be zoned to allow for the agricultural use. Just trying to go through my notes to see what would be good to highlight for you. Oh, I would say that as far as our understanding on behalf of the developers, you know, one of their reasons for wanting what you would consider blanket rezoning, which, you know, makes this, as far as staff, it makes it a little bit more difficult to evaluate. Especially, it comes with the complexity of whether there's a private road or a public road. So, and that actually could impact future servicing. So it makes it a little bit difficult to evaluate, like I said. But as far as the developers are concerned, what is the benefit for them is that in terms of marketing their property or negotiating, you know, commercial businesses that might want to come, it's difficult to do that when you don't have the right zoning in place, and you have to say, well, we could sign a letter of intent or a letter of agreement, but it's subject to us getting all these approvals from the city. It's easier for them to say, it's zoned this way, we're ready to plan for the business that you want to bring to Winkler, and then to implement it. So we understand, after having a good meeting with the developers about this, we, you know, came to a good understanding of why they're wanting to do it the way they're wanting to do it. It doesn't make it any easier for us to work through all of those things like the servicing and all of that. But we certainly understand that from their perspective, the other reason for doing it this way with a intended private road is the flexibility to, in the future, be able to negotiate accesses from there and servicing from there when they're the ones that have installed the infrastructure. Their dollars have been invested and put into the ground. And they're saying, you know, in fairness to everyone, that they need a way to protect that kind of investment when other people just want to connect to it. And there are ways of doing that. You know, and there are ways of doing it, whether it's a private road or a public road. You know, and it essentially, if it was a public road, it would look like the developers kind of front-ending the cost of the infrastructure and having the ability to recoup those costs in the future when other adjacent landowners would want to connect to servicing. So that makes sense to us, like that needs to be protected. All we're saying to you as council is there's ways to do that, whether it's private or whether it's public. If it was public, it would be our intent as staff to make put into it everything we need to protect the investment of the developers.
Okay.
Certainly there are challenges. I'm not saying that there's insurmountable challenges, but there's definitely challenges that we have to look at, including some more recent code changes that make it difficult to get servicing to be provided to another landowner from a different landowner and not from public access.
Mhm.
So those are some challenges that we would have to work through. Those are, you know, aspects of a development agreement that would have to be looked at really carefully. So on the other side of it, and I'll let the applicants speak for themselves if they want to address this part, but you know, you as council have directed us as staff several times to make sure when these kind of things happen that applicants are collaborating with adjacent landowners. And also when we met with the developers, they indicated to us an attempt to work with the one adjacent landowner to the east, and haven't been successful in, please correct me if I'm wrong, haven't been successful in being able to collaborate with that neighbor. And the neighbor to the west, they have talked to fairly recently, and that landowner has no immediate plans to do any development. So there's, I think, not much ability to collaborate at that point because they have no plans. And again, I'd ask you guys to correct me if I'm misspeaking. Okay. Be that as it may, the city still has an interest in making sure that there's an ability for those landowners to be able to develop. But at a certain point, they also have to be forthright with plans and things like that. So we are trying to, as staff, protect to some extent the interest of those adjacent landowners as well. But at the same time, recognizing the investment that the developers are now having to put into the ground. I don't think we need to highlight the previous subdivision. Because of the nature of the blanket rezoning and the fact that it's all one lot, if there were additional principal use buildings put up anywhere on this lot, that is something that would still come to council as a conditional use. So council would have some ability to address the development at that time. It's
Each additional building, should there be more than one, would,
correct.
Okay.
Each one would come to council as a conditional use, unless it was, a planned unit development was put in place. Right now, it doesn't meet the criteria of a planned unit development, which would require a full site plan to be submitted. So right now, the way it works is if this was approved, each additional principal use building would come to council as a conditional use. And that's good. That gives council some, and the city input on those. It still presents its challenges because we're piecemealing it, and to some extent, we don't see the big picture. But there lies the balance between flexibility to a developer and the city trying to also protect the way that the city is developed.
Okay.
If that's fair.
thank you.
Right now, there's no variations that we would know of because we don't have the final site plan or anything like that. And it is the intent right now of the developers to do what is being called Central Road as a private road. MTI, Community and Regional Planning from the province, and our own staff are recommending this would work better as a public road. Again, that's, and that is actually according to a previous development agreement, and I'm sorry, I know this is very complicated, and I apologize.
Indeed.
But one of the conditions of a prior development agreement is to have agreement that does the developer want public or private, and then that the city agrees and approves of that. At this point, we're saying that we would be asking council to approve whether or not that would be a private or a public road. Not saying that that would have to be done at this meeting necessarily, but that is a decision that has to be made. We would, of course, ask the developer if there was ever, and we've talked about this, if there was ever a chance of it being made a public road, that it would be built to city standards. Because if the city or future councils, even if it's 20 years down the way, would decide to accept that as a public road, then we want to make sure that it, and I don't think the developers had any issue with that. From what we can tell with the current plans, we don't have dimensioned plans. We did our own little overlay. It appears to look a little bit tight with a 66-foot wide right of way. Again, if it's private, it's private, and if there's very narrow setbacks from buildings to that right of way, that's up to the
Right.
developers. It's private.
Right.
If we were going to consider it later to be public, then we would have more input as it relates to some of those possible setbacks. And again, we say this knowing that they're not necessarily firm plans right now, but from the drawings that they've given us and which you have in your package. I think that there wouldn't be much choice with the way we see it today, that the infrastructure would likely have to be installed underneath the roadway. And in this case, in that case, our view as staff is that public infrastructure underneath a private road isn't necessarily something that we would be
Right.
recommending. Aside from that, you see that we'd still, with this application, need an engineered grading and servicing plan. We'd have to look at locating the private water and sewer services. So that's all things that be required. The rest, I think, is kind of, there's some standard stuff: walkways, accesses, street lighting, development fees. You know, at the time of this report, was done prior to annual planning. I know we had some discussion about development fees. The development fees that we have in place right now are $14,500 per acre. And Henry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or do you want to give any input on where council's lies on that right now?
I think prior to discussion with the affected parties, it would probably be inappropriate
Okay.
to use those numbers here yet.
Okay, so at this point, it's kind of the way the report reads is that the report was unsure as to what the development fees would be. Okay. Green space dedication, we don't see any on the plan right now, so we're just making notes there that there are requirements for public green space. At the time, also, we were really unsure about how major intersection improvements would be handled. And so that's feedback that we owe the developers very quickly as well. I'm not saying that it comes tonight, but
Agreed.
that is feedback that we owe them very quickly, I believe. But they did undertake a traffic impact study for a broad range of lands. And so some of the information here comes from that traffic impact study and information that our staff got from MTI with estimates totaling somewhere right around $900,000. I don't know if I need to go over, I think I've covered most of the highlights. At the end of your report, you saw a bit of a summary of our concerns.
Correct.
Again, you've had time to look at that. I don't know if you want me to go further into that, I certainly can.
I think we're good there, and I think time to look at those concerns is somewhat relative. We've had days rather
Yes,
than longer.
Indeed.
The biggest thing that I see here that is difficult to quickly move from is generally when projects like this come to our table, the vast majority of those development agreement details have been worked out and agreed to.
In advance, not usually.
I know when we see them, we generally say, these are what they are, and we reference the proponents, and the proponents say, we're aware of and we agree.
What we do.
When we
Yeah.
look at the pages and pages of this still has to be worked out and that still has to be worked out, I find it overwhelming to have those brought to this table when we're not the experts on it. Between our staff and our developers, we would anticipate that that would be where the expertise lies from that, and that we are able to have those conversations and general agreement. There may be a few pieces that need to be dealt with, but the report that you just gave of all of these things that still need to be dealt with, I would suggest that 3 days' notice to consider that isn't enough for council. And that's kind of where I sit right now. The hearing is here, and there's a rezoning application in front of us, but there's a lot that needs to be looked at when we take a look at some of these, and I would almost look at the proponent. My gut feeling is to ask that we adjourn this to February 11th and go from there, or that we if we move forward with approval, that we ask our proponent that they would need to agree to terms and conditions of a development agreement that have not yet been fully established, which I would be uncomfortable with. But John, if you would like, I'd love to hear maybe some of your thoughts to what Jody has mentioned and also to what we're struggling with here.
Okay, there is so much that the city has put in place as far as bureaucracy when you come in for an application, all the variations, so forth. I think you need to look at some of those things and see if there's something that we can maybe take off. For instance, when he mentions I can't do agriculture on the residual portion. If I put one building on there, 11 acres, I can't do agriculture. Like, where does that come from that you can't take care of the property that's not being developed? Like, this is, like, there's got to be some mechanism to look at that.
And if you'd allow, and that's an excellent question because it's one I had as well, and I don't believe that that is our rules, Jody, but that rezoning, I did see that as well, that now there's going to be this huge chunk of land that we're going to grow weeds on. That seems strange, but I suspect that's not Winkler's rule. Is that correct?
It is Winkler's rule in Winkler's zoning bylaw. So in Winkler's zoning bylaw, there's zones in which agricultural is allowed, and commercial general currently isn't one of the zones where agricultural use is allowed. So
Could that be a conditional use, or is that not allowed either in that
Well,
zone?
certainly it's your bylaw, and you can set the conditions that you want there.
Okay.
And if you directed staff, then what we would do, just like we would with anything else, we would put in front of you, here's an option for amending the zoning bylaw to allow something like that. Here's what some unintended consequences
And
could
that would be my next
in
question.
terms of, as far as we could predict. You can't see around all corners. Would there be, yeah, so, as always, staff are here to say, if you direct us to change
Fair.
your zoning bylaw, we will do everything in our power to bring in front of you the changes that you wish for Winkler.
And potentially what the consequences of said change might be
Correct.
to look around the corner.
Correct. So just respectfully, I don't actually see that part, and I get your point, but I don't see it as bureaucracy because council owns that bylaw, and if they want to change that, we don't have to have the province's permission. All council has to do is direct us to say, maybe this should be something to consider.
And I can understand the reasons behind it and whatever previous council put that in place. I would, rather than a blanket change, would consider something like this to make some sense as a conditional use so that we don't open up ourselves to a situation in the future that might be difficult. But that's a different conversation. It's a good
Yeah.
point, John, and I did notice that in the report as well.
Okay, secondly, I was informed by the city staff that you can't have two zonings on one property. Otherwise, I might have looked at this differently, but at this point, what I need, I have to go to commercial now, is what I'm working on.
Unless you subdivide, is that right?
If
Like-
you subdivide, you could,
Okay,
but I don't want to subdivide at this point, I want to keep it as one.
okay,
So that's another thing that could be looked at, like,
that challenge
Is there-
there.
Yeah,
You
because
can
you
have-
don't quite know what the rest of the property is gonna look like.
yeah, we have a
Okay.
conceptual plan, but we made, do that up so that there's something that the city could look at as to kind of what it could look like. City knows that it changes. You had to do a road closing industrial park because things change.
Exactly.
And so you
Yeah.
have to be open and flexible to that. If you're not,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
can't run things.
Just one remark on that is, in this case, that one is provincial,
Okay.
like, of having multiple zones within one lot. So that's a provincial regulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thirdly, the traffic study, which we did, we had to pay for, does not include a central road owned by the city, if you look at that. It's private, and that's why it was in there. We want to keep this private.
Okay.
So that's another issue that I have.
Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah?
Like, I'm just trying to understand why why do you want it as a private road? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, because it's going to probably be rentals, and I want to be able to control my property on that rental part.
On that back, like that whole piece?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Would you agree, John, that one of the other reasons was like protecting your investment? Like for accesses and so on, for servicing?
Yeah, and I mean, at the start, we want to keep it private as well, but we did have lots of conversations about that
Yeah.
Yeah.
one way or another.
Yeah.
Like, there's all kinds of regulations as far as having two accesses onto one property from two different roads, and
But I mean, even from your.
it's complicated trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
When I thought it was easy, I was just going to go and come and get a rezoning done.
Yeah.
So then the next part is I would ask council to approve this without conditions. And the reason for that is I look at some of the conditions that have been suggested here by city staff, and I could not agree with those. One is the developer acknowledged that he may be required to pay full costs associated with Park Street intersection improvements as identified by Moore. We are not the only landowner in that area. I don't think it's up to one developer to have to pay for the total cost. And so I would ask council not to.
And for that piece, John, we can take that off the table today. We just came from our annual planning session. Some thoughts towards intersection improvements did come up at that meeting, and we will very quickly be reaching out for a developer meeting to be able to discuss what those things were, which would not be at 100% developer responsibility. So that conversation we do need to have, and I believe we're already chasing dates for that, so we're going to have that meeting very quickly.
Well, that's great, thank you.
But as Jody already mentioned, this is an answer that you need fairly quickly to help you establish where you're going, and we're prepared to move very quickly on that today because we do have direction from council at annual planning.
Among another one of the 14 items there is that the developer agrees to register a no-sell clause on the lot unless the owner can take on the seller's fiscal responsibilities, bond requirements. That's a no-go for me.
Which number was that again?
Number 7. The developer must provide a blanket water sewer servicing easement to the adjacent property owners to the east and west, have equal opportunity to develop. You know what a blanket easement is? They can go and enter anywhere on that property to connect. Whether it be in front of a property that I'm developing or not, who knows? You would think not, but you're always
Correct.
looking at the worst case scenario.
Absolutely.
I think we could put something in there that would say we would agree to help provide the neighbor with some services.
And
If they pay the share that is due for that.
And I think that's kind of where I was referencing at the beginning. These types of discussions, to be able to get to wording that is fair to you, the developer, and allows us to be able to take a look at this and say it makes sense and to quickly approve it. Generally, those conversations have been had before it gets to our table with this long list of things that still need to be addressed. And I don't know whether adjourning for 2 weeks gives enough time to do that, or what that looks like, but it is going to be very hard for council to try to determine specifically what we need to do in order to make that decision. We're supposed to sit at a governance level where we make the decision on the rezoning, but far be it for any of us as council to determine where connections should be or shouldn't be. We're bound to make the wrong decision if you ask us to start making them. And that's I think where I'm challenged right now. And I feel and sense some frustration on your part as well. We seem to have arrived at this place that you certainly wouldn't be able to agree to some of the things that you see there as recommendation, or at least initial conversation pieces, but we can't really approve without some of those answers being in place. So we're in a bit of a hard place right now.
So My
Please, Don.
question is, like, to me, I look at the proposed, what it looks like. Could change, but when I look at what's proposed, I don't see an issue with what, like, with, it looks like, you know, some retail, whatever, maybe some more retail and then some multifamily towards the far
Agreed.
north. Like, I don't,
The glue is in the details, and that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
Usually those details have been addressed when it gets here, so that it's more straightforward for us to look at the proposed idea and say, that looks like a good development, and that we can then confidently approve it.
and it's commercial beside it. So which is what we want to be zoned commercial now. So I'm trying to, like, to me, I look at it and I go, commercial, you know, residential, you know, multifamily at the end, similar to what's there. It all looks exactly kind of what the issue, or what is beside it. I'm trying to, so the issue is the issue the utilities and the private road? Is that the biggest hiccup here? Or I'm just trying to, I go through this thing and I read through it and I'm going like, there's just so much,
Correct.
I felt bad for you and I felt bad for the staff because they gotta try to educate us people up here, which sometimes takes a while, but like if we.
There's a lot of the little things that generally wouldn't be there. The 10% green space dedication for the residential component, the 2% green space dedication for the commercial component. A lot of those kinds of things still need to be dealt with.
But they always are in every development.
But then that question is, generally, by the time we're here, we have some
Okay.
thought on that. We can certainly add it to terms and conditions of the development agreement, but which items ultimately need to move to a terms and conditions, and how long is that, and how difficult does it then make it for staff and the developer to agree to it? As John has already said, he would prefer approval without conditions, but those are things that need to be dealt with at some point.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that it's an application for rezoning, but it seems that it's been put to an application for development and everything has to go as a development here. We're just doing a rezoning. After that comes the development part where you have to get your permits for different things, which then at that point you can dictate what's with this development, how we're gonna do this, what are we gonna build, right? So I find it interesting that this all comes through, and that's why my ask was,
That's a good
and it
question.
is, to approve this without conditions. I just want to mention one more condition that
Please.
I find I could not agree with.
Okay.
Developer must provide a blanket and defined easement for access. The adjacent landowners must accept a future obligation to maintain a reserve fund and privately construct and maintain their infrastructure as private. Now, because I'm going to ask for rezoning, the neighbor's going to have his private. He doesn't have option of having it as public or private. I don't see how that can even be put into there. So again, I've taken a lot of time.
No.
Yeah,
No,
it's important to have this time, that's critical.
And that's
so.
what we have to figure out is try to figure this out here, how this works. So I'm just, so if I own the land on the highway and it's not zoned commercial development, I say I want to zone it commercial, but I'm not sure what I want to do with it. Can I just zone it commercial?
Stephanie, could
Like
you,
if there's,
could you
like,
weigh
I
on,
have-
on
that's-
the rezoning?
Like, I don't, yeah, I'm just,
So,
I'll get
you hear me?
Stephanie for you to introduce yourself as well, just for the record.
sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Stephanie Jantz, Planning and Permitting Manager for the City of Winkler. This report was a challenge for all of the staff. In particular, I think the challenge that we see is there's not as much information as we're historically used to seeing. So we see a great concept plan. It aligns with, commercial use. It potentially could comply with neighborhood center policies. The zoning itself isn't a problem. The future residential could be approved by council through conditional use. Like, there's lots of different avenues to see development occur. The challenge is that we don't have a grading or servicing plan that demonstrates how the neighboring properties can or could be developed in the future. Private servicing across property lines poses challenges. The province does mandate certain standards for drinking water that we know, like the civil needs to be built to a certain standard. I think if there was a preliminary grading and servicing plan, our engineering services department could weigh in better. In terms of the road placement, like, no major concerns. However, if it is sort of proposed as private initially when built, it would need to meet city standards now when it's built to be considered public, which means no private utilities or like registered, like easements in the right-of-way. Typically, we'd want to see a typical 66-foot wide municipal right-of-way as a cross-section with boulevards. Currently, it's a little tight for that type of design.
Steph,
Now-
sorry to interrupt. Could I get you to comment though separately on the rezoning versus future development? Like, and I think that's a little bit the question that
That's
you're
the
trying to
question,
get at is,
Okay.
would it be workable to just do a rezoning and
Like, I have 20 acres on the highway.
private
I don't,
road,
but-
all of those other things
It's really
would
up to
come later?
council's level of comfort. So if you're confident that our zoning bylaw will prescribe the end result that you're interested in seeing there for these 11 acres, then there's really no issue with rezoning today. However, like, we have limited opportunities for development agreements. So, with each subsequent building, should council choose through that conditional use process, you could sort of get more refined with what you'd like to see if there's concerns. The rezoning itself is a little unprecedented to rezone 11 acres. Normally, what we'd recommend is you kind of bite off a piece at a time, subdivide it, rezone it. That would enable the cropping to continue on the back end until it's ready. We did have some chats with assessment. They do look at rezoning as a critical milestone in terms of when they increase the assessment on properties. Occasionally, they do split assessments, but that's at their discretion. So,
Would the rezoning limit the city's ability to have input on a private road and where underground infrastructure would go? Like, would that be kind of up, at that point, that would be up to the developer, or there would be still room for city input at that point?
There's some room for city input for the servicing from public infrastructure to this next retail building. That would need to still be permitted through the standard, water and sewer connection permit process.
So I'm back to my original question. I own 20 acres on the highway, and it's in the city. It's on the other side of DJ's, I'm gonna say. And I want to, I want to put a strip there, commercial now, zone it. And I go, well, I got some ideas, but I just want to zone commercial, so I know I can start working on something.
Yep.
So I come to the city, and the city goes, yeah, it fits into our plan, do we approve it? And then I've got commercial land. I'm trying to walk through in my head here a little bit.
Yeah,
Help me, just bear
I
with me.
think the challenge is, this is not exactly greenfield. It's somewhat infill in the sense that there's an existing road to the north and there's some future development that's needing to occur to the east and west. So
But the pro-
could
so-
they rezone without showing you any plans? Absolutely. You could at your discretion approve any zone amendment
But
without
has it
any
been
supporting
done?
documentation.
Has it been done? And then I come with my plan and I say, okay, this is what I'm planning to build. And you go, oh, this looks pretty good, or, we gotta tweak this. Your road's not wide enough, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm just wondering,
Well, in the past, like, if someone came with a rezoning, again, if it's a little bit different context, but just to
Okay.
give an example, if you come with a rezoning application for infill, and there's no plan, it's just
Yeah.
a rezone, then the neighbors don't really know what input they would want to give or so on. But I get it, and I'm just giving an example
Okay, yeah,
there,
no, I'm-
where you all have said you'd like to see plans for that.
Yeah,
Now here, it is different, like there's different kinds of neighbors
Yeah.
here and so on. So what could be done is, just like that infill project, if you rezoned it, then they could build whatever they wanted that fits within that zone as a permitted use, without coming back to council. So that could happen here too. But in this case, you have some ability, because anything that they build there has to come here as a conditional use. So
what-
it's still a little bit, it's a little bit more piecemeal than maybe the way we normally do it, but as council, you would still have input at that conditional use application level.
But not for the next building. So lot 2 by itself is the 11 acres. There's
Right.
nothing on those lands today. The first principal use building need only comply with
Right.
CG uses per section 3.2 of our zoning bylaw. So large retail is permitted. There's several other commercial uses that are permitted. There's some that are conditional use, and of course, there's some that aren't permitted. So, like, understanding that the developer may want flexibility to change their mind once the property is zoned commercial, council just needs to understand that, you know, once it's rezoned, if there's no conditions placed now, then whatever proposal that comes in, if the use is permitted in the commercial zone, and all of the development permit comes in, the site review happens, it can be serviced, all of the setbacks, all of the bulk requirements are satisfied, it wouldn't come to council's table again. So it really depends how much sort of municipal control. If there's conditions you'd like to impose now, this would be one of the opportunities to do so.
So what I understand is part of the problem is the size of the lot, the size of the rezone. So would it have made a difference had they not said it was gonna stay private?
I think that's different. I think it would have been different. It would have been a different report if it had been said, okay, we're doing a subdivision for large retail, that'll go till there. It would be different. But here, what we're hearing the developer say is,
Not at
we
this
wanted to
time.
zone this, and we want the flexibility to build what works for us. Like, what they had planned before, that opportunity could still be there, or it could slip away quickly, and they have to
Right.
pivot. So what you're hearing them say is, give us that flexibility. What you're hearing us as staff say is, you know, that's in your wheelhouse to provide the blanket rezoning. What we're saying is, you'll have a little more limited ability to have input on what that all looks like.
But-
So
After the
that's
first,
your comfort level to,
but
But-
after.
to make sure we understand, after the first building though, every single building after that
Correct.
comes back. So
Yeah.
we're gonna see it more often.
correct.
But only
But-
if it doesn't comply.
No,
No, every building, after that first one.
the first building, they can build.
Okay.
Any second principal use after that building comes here as conditional use. So that, like Stephanie's saying, is that right now you have some ability, and you'll still have some ability, but maybe a little bit less, and.
Or
so-
different ability.
Or different ability.
Yeah.
And just to clarify something a little bit, Henry, like, generally speaking, when we get to this point of a public hearing, seldom do we have all of the details of the development plan in place at that point. We have a report to council that usually has a lot of those points covered off, but a development agreement is by far negotiated with the applicants after.
Correct, but
This meeting.
but it's already stated what we're gonna still agree on. Like,
I
there
think,
are-
Stephanie, you would suggest that often there's some significant items that have to be negotiated afterwards. However, we've got the structure, the main components we've given you, and we've given the applicant. But you're right that, you know, the details of it is really where the rubber hits the road, and there's a lot that you still have to do. So going back to this, yes, this could be done as a simple rezone, and then that's up to your comfort
Yep.
level as council to approve or not approve.
So when we rezone the industrial, like we developed an industrial park and now it's industrial land.
Yeah.
That's zoned industrial.
Yeah,
You can build a building, as long as you fit into the guidelines. You can build whatever building you want, as long as you fit into the rule book.
yeah, yeah.
The one piece that I guess as staff we're interested in from council's direction would be, the current development agreement states that there's an agreement that between the city and the developer on the ownership and the maintenance model of the infrastructure. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to express is, like, if the next retail store is constructed in a manner that doesn't allow for a public road to pass beyond connecting to Northlands Parkway, then what we're saying is we're comfortable with that.
So the biggest hick, or the biggest, maybe, I'm trying to me, I'm trying to understand what's the biggest stumbling block. Is it, A, that it's private road, private infrastructure? That's the big.
That is one concern.
And the neighbor that to the east would have a similar type lot, it's long, narrow, and they would have to service it from north-south, is that correct, or go
They,
south?
they don't have land that goes till Northlands Parkway.
No, so they would have to service it to the
West, I
west,
believe, right?
Or continue in from the south.
or go down to the main road, is that?
I don't know, I'd have to speak with engineering, but there is a limit to how much can be serviced from Boundary Trail due to the sewer depth. So the back of those lands may have to be serviced from the developer's land.
Yeah.
So then,
It's unlikely that it could be serviced.
Hang on one second, Tim, I'll get you to grab the microphone, so
come on, you know the road.
you've got to introduce yourself and then,
Sorry, Tim Weeb, Engineering Service Manager.
Thank you,
Just
Tim.
to speak to your question there, Don. That lot is challenged similar to this lot that or the land that we're discussing. Sewer service to the south would likely, and I mean, we haven't verified 100%, but we know from the neighboring property that there was challenges to service it all the way to the south. So right now, it's landlocked to the north. There's the neighboring lot to the east cannot proceed to Northlands Parkway, so the only option would likely be to flow gravity into the adjacent property, which is what we're discussing here.
Okay.
There may be some other options, but truthfully, they haven't been fully vetted, but it's not looking positive for that.
One of my other concerns would be, in the event of a water break, what access would we have? And would there be a meter pit to meter that private portion all on its own? Or would we, in the
Yes.
event that there would be some people affected, how would that turn out? Could we just go turn the valve off and say you gotta fix it, or
Well,
how does that?
therein lies a lot of the details of looking into the details of a
It digs a
more
little
developed
deeper.
plan,
Mhm.
and we're not there yet. But those are all valid questions, but without going too far down the road, I mean, I think to the point, like you asked, whether if it's private or public, even if they didn't have a fully vetted plan, and they're saying, okay, well, our plan is to run a subdivided road through. We don't know what the properties are gonna look like, but we know we need to run this through. I think that would bring the staff a lot larger level of comfort, because we know that the infrastructure would be under the ownership of the city. I think that would lead a little more credibility or comfort for the staff. There is concerns about such a large piece being deemed as a private water system.
Yeah.
It's not that it can't be linked into the city's distribution system, but something of that nature and that size would likely need to be looped, meaning it needs a connection from the south and the north. So we would have a city system on the south, city system on the north, and then you'd have private interconnecting. So there's the ability for water to flow and pass through. That in itself isn't a hard stop. The province would allow something like that to occur, but they strongly recommend against it. In our conversation with Office of Drinking Water, we would still be the authority even though we don't own it, so we're still responsible for everything happening in that water system and responsible for all the connections to it. So that's an interesting perspective that we have to evaluate what that actually means, especially on something this scale. Normally when we see a subdivision coming in as a condo or private, there's one water main going in, it usually supplies a hydrant. and then you have your condo services coming off of that. And it's fairly contained, there's
Yeah.
little implication to the rest of the distribution system. This, again, going down a little bit further down the road than we should, could have potential for us to experience some things that we haven't really come across before. So it's about looking around the corner and understanding what does this mean for us, and what are we getting into? And again, this is about zoning, not about the details of the
Correct.
subdivision, so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
No, but
I
it-
digress
it's-
a little bit on that.
Yeah, and I appreciate, because I'm just trying to, like, to me, it appears like it should be simple, bang, bang, neighbors, commercial, this commercial, let's go. But it's, the big thing is, and we've never done a private sewer water type thing, have we, in the development?
Yes, you
Yeah.
have Walmart, and that whole commercial area is all private.
That's private roads
Okay.
and,
Private roads and private, okay.
Yeah, the road is private there, but there too, that water system. is a
Tim, I'll
private
get-
system. It's a-
I'll get you again to come back to the microphone, please.
Yes, that system is private, but it's, the water system there doesn't loop in and then feed a bunch of different properties and then loop back out into the
Okay.
distribution system. It's a single in.
So
that's
if, let's say, I'm just trying to narrow it down, so if the water system would not be looped in and out, that'd be an easier thing?
It potentially could, but there's challenges in that, like, there's only so far you can run a single main a certain length.
Yeah.
Before you start having problems with maintaining proper residual chlorine and stuff like that.
Okay.
So even in our own specifications, we have a maximum length that we can dead end a main.
Okay.
For like in a residential neighborhood, like a bays have, a maximum length.
okay.
Yeah,
We're-
other potential
I-
challenges I'll just say is just that trying to negotiate proper easements between different parties. If you're asking another private party to latch into another private
Private,
party's
yeah.
distribution, yes, there's a lot of other agreements that need to be ironed out, so.
If, council, the one thing I would say is that if you want to consider the rezoning today, I think one condition we can't get away from is the negotiation and agreement of the city of the road to determine public or private. So that's something that would, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, at a minimum, I think from staffing perspective and based on an agreement in a development agreement, that the one condition would have to be that we negotiate, the city negotiate with the developer on the details of private versus public.
Regarding our water situation, we can take a service off a boundary trail, run it halfway up the lot, loop it back onto that same line, and do the same thing from Northlands Parkway. So I have two loops into there, so it wouldn't be a problem with the length of line.
They wouldn't be connected loops, then, is
There would
what
be
you're
connected
saying.
Loops, yeah.
They would be
Both sides,
connected,
one off of
yeah.
Northlands, one off of boundary.
We did talk about that with the developers a little bit at a meeting, so,
Like I said,
Tim.
sorry, John, we did talk about that, but there's also the aspect of what that maximum length looks like. So
Right.
we would have to.
how far
Based on
in,
Discussion, it sounds
yeah.
like there would need to be some more vetting of that.
yeah.
So that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road in this conversation. And I would defer here to the proponent, unless you've got some additional comments, John, you'd like us to.
I think this can all be worked out once we make an application for a building and you decide how this is gonna get serviced and where.
Well, and
I
that
see
was
why it
gonna
has to
be,
a part of a rezoning.
and that was gonna be what I would ask now of you, whether we adjourn this meeting to February 11th to try to answer a few of these questions, or whether we move forward and say that we're gonna approve the rezoning subject to a comprehensive development agreement that will be determined between staff and yourselves to answer these questions. Not saying that you are going to agree to every single one of these concerns, but that agreement would be discussed and negotiated. I'm not sure if you have a preference in terms of how to best move that forward. Ultimately, as we've heard, we can approve this rezoning and we can have the first building come in, but there's a number of questions that still need to be answered. And the one we absolutely cannot get away from is we have to determine that public or private road.
So let me just clarify something. Stephanie, if we look at the development agreement that we have that has that condition, can you refresh us, like, what At what point does that development agreement say that we have to determine whether the road is private or public? Is it at rezoning, or is it at any further development?
So under Schedule A of the agreement, that was signed in October of 2022, it states that the owner acknowledges and agrees that the city will not consider the approval of Phase 2, meaning in this case Lot 2, as shown on Schedule D, until a decision is made by the owner and agreed to by the city regarding the ownership and maintenance responsibility of the street labeled Central Road and any infrastructure installed it, including any easement areas. So as staff, our recommendation is a public infrastructure model. The developer is seeking private ownership. Because this term in the agreement states we need to come to terms with this before we contemplate Phase 2, I view this as being something council needs to provide staff with input on or direction.
So to
Okay.
clarify my question, that's in a development agreement, and so we have a mechanism to negotiate that with the developers. My question is, do we have that ability regardless of the rezoning?
I think it's unclear, like, we don't have, as a condition of development permit approval, the authority or the ability or the mechanism to require a development agreement. Since no subdivision is being contemplated, since no conditional use is likely
And no
required for large
public road
retail.
opening would be.
There's no public road opening. The rezoning is the only opportunity council has to put conditions on the next large retail proposed or any large commercial building on this 11 acres of land. So in some ways, it's a little open-ended. If council is comfortable rezoning commercial today, so be it. We can enter into a development agreement and negotiate with the developer sort of to the best of our ability, based on any specific council direction given. The number of conditions there were identified to just highlight potential concerns because of the uncertainty and the unknowns that we as staff are seeing. Like the water looping is an example where we just simply don't have enough information to know if there will be unintended consequences. As we know, Walmart is a private development. Main Street North is private. A lot of residents think it's public and are surprised to find out it's public or private, sorry. If we're comfortable sort of duplicating sort of that scenario here, there's really no reason why council couldn't approve the rezoning today.
With the condition that that road is figured out.
We'd
Or
like
without-
direction on
or
that,
without.
yes.
I don't think it's necessary that it has to be done for rezoning.
Not necessarily, but there is a quick need to figure that out, and that is a question, and I wonder if, in fact, a 2-week adjournment allows the city and yourselves to answer that question. Would that give, and I would ask both the city and and yourself, does 2 weeks help you determine an answer to that question that allows us to do a blanket rezoning without condition on the rest of it?
Well, I mentioned already that I want to keep it private. I want to see the rezoning without conditions at the start, and we will work on the conditions when we're making a building permit.
So,
And-
so the road, like, to me, that could be a problem in the development agreement, maybe, private or public.
And we have a stated point, as John said, his stated intention is for
It's
it to be a
private.
private road. If, in fact, we adjourn for 2 weeks, does that allow the city and the developer to get together to discuss that, to make sure that that makes sense, so that we can confidently approve it on the 11th?
Well, my question going back to staff is, again, what ability would we have to negotiate the terms of a private road if it were not attached as a condition to this rezoning? Do we have any?
I don't believe so. So the tools in the toolbox that a municipality has to enter development agreements would be rezoning, subdivision, variance, and conditional use.
Right.
Beyond that, we have no ability as a condition of building permit or development permit to put conditions related to design or infrastructure on a developer beyond that which is currently in our zoning bylaw.
So legally, like, if you've rezoned it, they can develop it, and they could put it in a private road.
Correct. And my question again would be,
Okay, yeah, your question
our
is 2 weeks.
developer has stated the desire for a private road.
Yeah,
Our development agreement already signed state that we have to figure that out and see what that is. So that question, can we have a conversation with our developer to see if in fact we can be in a place that the city is also comfortable with a private road there that allows us then to confidently, without condition, come back and have that discussion on February 11th.
here's how I would answer that. If that would be, at that point, I think I'd almost prefer to see you approve the rezoning with a condition of negotiating the terms and conditions of a private road and servicing. Because if you do that today,
Then we can start.
then we can start and we can actually talk to council about, like, at this point, we really need some further input from council on,
Okay.
on what you want to see in terms of some of those. We don't need you to place manholes. We need some general high-level decisions about the idea of the private road with public infrastructure underneath it. So that would enable us to talk to you about it, or you to talk to the developer, because if you adjourn this public hearing today.
We can't have those
We're bound under the
conversations.
Planning Act for you not to talk to the developers and for us not to talk with you about it outside of a public hearing.
Correct.
So we're handcuffed,
Yeah, agreed.
One of my,
you know, and so
concerns-
it's just, sorry if I could finish.
okay, go ahead.
In my opinion, if we would approve it with the condition that the terms and conditions of the private road and the servicing of it be negotiated, now we can just freely talk.
Okay, so what would be the difference now if our neighbor to the east comes and says he wants to do some developing? There's no agreement about a road or how it's gonna be done. What's the difference from that to mine? He's got the property, it's rezoned. He knows if he's coming in, he's gonna have to come to you guys and say, this is what I want to be doing, this is the building I'm building. So what's the difference from that to what I'm asking for you?
So when he would come in, we would have the ability, and Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, they'd be applying, what's our ability in that case?
There'd
to-
be a conditional use, unless it was proposed as an accessory building to the existing.
What if it's a blank slate? The land next to them is a blank slate. There's
The
no,
land to the east is already zoned commercial, the land to the west is currently zoned development reserve.
so let's use the example of the land to the east. It's zone
zoned
commercial.
ready, yeah.
Would we
Yeah.
have any opportunity to enter into any development agreement if they come with an application?
For conditional use, yes.
Okay, there you go.
But if they build the building to the back that fits all, whatever, there would be, then it would not be a conditional use?
If it's an accessory use building, it would be
Okay, so- But
permitted.
it's a.
But
another
it's,
retail.
there is no building, so it can't be accessory. It would have to be
The property to the east or
Yeah.
the
The
west?
east.
the east.
The
That's zoned
east, there's
commercial
an
right now.
existing commercial building there.
Oh, there
Yeah.
is.
Yeah,
So
but-
therefore, the second building would come to your table as a conditional use.
So what
Okay.
if that was, there was no building on it?
And it were zoned commercial, then it would be a situation where they could apply to build anything that is permitted in the commercial zone. And it wouldn't come to council's attention.
Including a road?
A private road, through the subdivision process, a public hearing occurs when there's a road opening as a public road, but we don't have sort of a mechanism to approve private roads presently.
So, one of my concerns, maybe it's not a concern, is if ever, let's say 30, 40 years down the road, we're not here anymore doing this, it goes into disrepair and nobody's taking care of it, it's still a private piece, what happens to it? Like, does the public take over? Does the city take over at that point? And the concern I would have is also to somehow make sure that we can put things in the ground and on top of the ground to city standards, so that at least if and when the city takes over, that we're in that, at that point, it's not just some inferior stuff in the ground, like we have certain standards that we have to meet, so.
And I think there's some challenges with some of that though, because we look at the Southland Mall and the different pieces that were there and the internal streets that aren't there and Walmart. Some of those places would be hard to say, once we've committed to a private road. In all intents and purposes, that's a private road.
Private.
Yeah, we would never take it over.
Correct. And that's.
But there's houses, if there's gonna be housing here,
But
it'll just always stay a condo corp.
It's not condo.
No.
no,
Same as Walmart.
And
but let's say,
Okay, maybe it's not
like
a
you have
concern.
on the coast, there's some residential on the north. So that would, are you thinking then maybe, like, would that be part of this development, or would you subdivide it one day and change it to multifamily, or I'm just trying to, how does that work? I'm just trying to understand a little bit.
Okay, so if I would be putting some multifamily on the north end of the property, it would come off a separate entrance there. It
But-
could come off the
but-
private road.
But then it would still be, it would be a private apartment on private property.
Be no different than any other apartment.
Okay,
buil-
okay, no,
Because
Exactly.
it has like 4 buildings on it.
Yep, yeah, so that's, so we would, like, if he doesn't maintain it, that's his problem. That's
Exactly.
not the city's problem,
Agreed.
you know, whether.
The only challenge is, and the point that was made, is that it will appear to be a public road. And some of that can obviously be mitigated with signage that says private road. But that would be one concern. Again, past the rezoning, that concern comes up. I would appreciate, Stephanie, if you would read me that note again from the October 22 condition.
Okay, I'll read it exactly here.
you
So
could.
subsection 9, the owner acknowledges and agrees that the city will not consider the approval of Phase 2 as shown on Schedule D attached here too until a decision is made by the owner and agreed to by the city regarding the ownership and maintenance responsibility of the street labeled Central Road and any infrastructure installed within it, including the required easement areas. So you could interpret that the approval of Phase 2 could be the development permit approval of any building on Phase 2, which then would allow some time to negotiate.
And that's an excellent point, Stephanie. I think we have an agreement already that that needs to be done.
But it does also say the owner decides.
Correct.
And so I've decided.
And now the terms and conditions need, and exactly, you've decided.
Yes.
Now the second part of that conversation
Terms and
has to happen.
conditions.
That
So the
said,
terms and conditions are part of if it goes public.
no,
It was
also
to
how the
the
servicing
approval
will
of the
be
city or
underneath the
something like
private
that.
road.
It says here, until a decision is made by the owner and agreed to by the city regarding the ownership and maintenance responsibility of the street.
So I think
So
from,
I will be responsible for the maintenance of the streets. I'm gonna be owning the streets, I'll be responsible for maintaining the streets.
exactly. So in
For the
that
snow
instance,
clearing.
when we look at that, to say, and I would suggest, council, that we consider that we do approve, or at least the motion would read that we approve the rezoning, subject to the fulfillment of that last condition on the previous piece about the road. And to Stephanie's point, it doesn't have to be today. It can, we can buy a little bit of time to have that conversation prior to the permit for the building. That gives a little bit of time to work out the details of what that's going to look like, because there would be some conversation. You've made the decision, which was the first step of that. Now the second step is, what does that look like?
So now we're starting to develop. We're not just changing the zoning. We're
Correct.
starting to developing it. I'm not developing it, I'm just only rezoning.
And it again takes that step back to, before we move forward, that last condition needs to be met.
I think if I could, John's point is.
I'm not developing
And I'll,
today.
just correct me if I'm wrong. Your point is, there's already a development agreement that requires that. why does it need to be a condition of the rezoning?
Exactly.
That's your point, right?
Yeah, it's all there, like, why
So-
do you need to redo it?
So,
And I think what we hear Stephanie saying is, if we consider the interpretation of that point, that when they would apply for their first permit to build,
That would be
that's
considered
when
development.
we make those final negotiations.
Correct, although council's input would be passed if the zoning is approved today, because,
Right.
so that's a key distinction.
Yeah.
And in this situation, council's input isn't what's needed in that condition, because that discussion and that agreement needs to be between the staff with the expertise and the developer with the expertise. Council isn't going to tell you where to put sewer or services underneath the ground and what those connections look like.
No.
That's way above our pay
No,
grade.
you might give some general direction, like,
Bingo.
do you want to allow public infrastructure under a private road? Council, we defer to you. Is that something you
Agreed.
want?
But there is no,
That's general.
there is no private road, there's no public infrastructure under a
No, I know,
private road.
I'm talking about in the future.
yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like right now, it'd be all private. It'd be all, yeah, so the, like, so we like, he's decided, private road. The decision's made now, so that has been fulfilled.
No,
Under the
second
The
part
city-
of it
Second.
is,
The second part is the city would have to approve that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so
But
then,
that, what I think the point is being said is that can be done, again, I'm not saying which way you should go, I'm saying what the developer is saying is that that could still be done outside of the rezoning.
because
The
that
developers
condition is
come,
there.
the developer has come with one request today,
zoning,
rezone.
period.
So,
And we're
yes,
looking at a 23-page report based on a rezoning.
right.
Yes, which I haven't seen before.
And which is because of these complications, like, it's
Yeah.
not, like, the last thing we wanna do as staff is just work extra time to create a 23-page report. But it, you know, we look at the drawings and the intent and go, there are some potential complications here for servicing future infrastructure. So, which we're responsible for as our, you know, engineering services manager has said, we're still responsible for the drinking water and that servicing. So, you know, we've come to it from that perspective. I wish it wasn't as complicated in our minds, and maybe it was overcomplicated, I don't know. But we tried our best to address the city's concerns on all of these things and have an option to be able to speak, have council speak to them. But we sit here before you again saying, you know, this is, we've tried to give you as much good information as we can. And you hear what the developers want, you hear ours. I think that the choice is before you now.
Okay?
So a lot of these standards have to be met regardless whether it's private or public, right? There's
See,
no
in
choice.
in
some.
22, when we made the agreement about that, we weren't sure whether we private or public. And so we agreed with the city, we would put that first stretch of the road past the development would be built according to city standards, everything, and it was inspected, it was engineered, and as-built drawings got to the city. We did our part.
Yep.
We have, the sidewalk still needs to come in. It's done. But other than that, we did our part. Now we are saying we want to do it private,
Yeah.
as the option was there at that time.
Correct.
Yeah.
So please do the rezoning.
So crystal clarity, we rezone and we move forward prior to a permit being issued. The second part of that would need to be honored. Meaning, we have to, with the city, and I don't suspect that we would withhold that, but the questions that need to be answered have to be answered. Per that
Per the
agreement.
previous development agreement, yeah.
So
I
we're
believe so.
protected in that regard.
I think so.
Does that include the finer details of the walkways, the green space and all those
Well,
things?
those,
We
that,
don't have any.
yeah, that happens later on.
That's
That's
depending
not part
on-
of the rezone.
That's part of how they want to develop.
Correct.
And the water looping, stuff like that would be something that, let's say, half of it gets developed, the other half gets developed. Is that an MSTW thing for the protection of the water issue, or is that, how do those, I'm just wondering, how do you work those out, you know?
No, so that's a combination of, like, their engineered plans will have to go to Office of Drinking Water for
Okay,
approval.
okay,
So
so
there is
there's-
a regulatory layer in there, so I
Okay.
mean, their engineers already know that.
Yeah, they're aware of that.
Okay, good.
There's just some, for the city, once it does get installed, it's just what's our authority in it, what's our, how does that impact us?
Yeah.
So we would have to look at it from our engineering services,
Okay,
so, yeah.
thank you. I see somebody else who has an interest, again, name for the record, if you don't mind.
Martin Harder, just an innocent bystander.
Welcome, Mark.
I'm glad I'm not in your hot seat and I'm not in your hot seat, so I just, a general observation. I happen to have a doctor's appointment in Winnipeg today, so we went to Winnipeg to the outlet because that's where the men's clinic is and whatever. And I observed, and I'm looking at this development, thinking of this development, and I look at that development where IKEA is and Cabela's, and you see all that mishmash of road structures that I hate actually, but it's private road. On both sides of the road, there's not a single one of those that was part of the concept in the first place, because they're still building, they're still adding. So I can't see as far as, and I'm sure it was rezoned, so I think from their perspective, from the city's perspective, your perspective from the city, is access from your public road to this private road. If there's traffic studies or whatever, obviously Kennison has been studied, and because of IKEA and it's 4-lane and whatever. That's where the city's involvement was, as far as the development of that area. There's terms and conditions, I think, that are very similar here as they are there. I personally don't think it's a big thing. The other note I was just going to say, please don't let them take the rest of the 14 acres and let them go to weeds. We've had enough of that. Let them farm it.
Thank you for your comments, Martin, and hopefully your doctor's appointment went well. Do we have any other comments here from proponent or other interested parties? Additional comments or questions from council or staff before we close the hearing?
Marvin here.
Go ahead, Marvin.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of things. I appreciate very much the developers that we have in this, and I appreciate the challenges that you have in planning ahead and wanting to remain flexible. That makes a lot of sense. I know as a city, we are responsible to make sure that the end result works well for the city. I don't have any doubt that is your intent as well. My question now is, if we do redevelop this, that was just a specific piece, or if we do pass this, how does that affect the fact that we have some prop area for the foreseeable future? Do we have to do something with that, or is that something that we can add to? He's not seating for a couple of months yet, so we have a little bit of time for that. Maybe that would be my question. Thank you.
Did you hear that?
I missed
The-
kind of the part of that.
Not being able to use it as the residual as farmland. Do we have an ability to deal with that here today, or is that a conditional
No.
use we have to deal with
We
afterwards?
would have to make his own
Agreed.
bylaw amendment.
Okay.
Yep.
So we can certainly ask staff to take a look at that and bring something forward to that. Not seeing additional comments here. Be it resolved that the public hearing for bylaw number 2329-24 be closed. Mover.
Ryan,
Ryan second. Ryan got it, Marvin got the second. All in favor? Closed.
Yeah.
Be it resolved that bylaw number 2329-24 be approved. Mover.
Ryan,
Second.
Don?
Jody, did I get the wording on that correct?
Yeah, let's reread, where's my?
Your wording was, be it resolved that bylaw 2329-24 be approved.
Correct.
Can we, subject,
Correct.
This is second reading. Sorry, my apology. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2329-24 be given second reading. We have a mover and we have a seconder. Do we have comments or thoughts on that?
well, it's just, so it's still subject to that,
The development agreement.
The motion on the table has no conditions.
That is correct.
but it's still
The-
tied to,
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
not tied to it,
Or
but
historic-
there's still an existing development
Yeah.
agreement that has to be adhered to.
that's what I'm, yeah.
And the key piece, there's nothing that ties it to it,
But
other than
it's
an
in place.
agreement that the city and the developer have already made.
Correct.
In place.
Correct, it's already in place. Any further thoughts or comments or questions?
The upcoming decision then will be to approve rezoning or adjourn it for a couple weeks, correct?
Well,
The
the motion
decision
that's on
now
the
is
table
to
is second,
approve.
to approve
Right,
second
okay.
reading.
Yeah.
Presumably, if that's passed, it would go to third reading.
Correct. And finally passed.
Right.
I don't see anybody else with thoughts. All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. Be it resolved that we give third reading to bylaw number 2329-24 and passed. Mover.
Peter?
Second.
Dawn.
Don. Last thoughts question? All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. A long road to get there, but we got there. I'm wondering, Stephanie, if you can see if Councillor Fraze has quit on us and gone home, or whether he's still hanging out there
He's
somewhere.
probably sleeping in the, in your office, what you usually do. No, I didn't say that.
He did wander by.
Okay, we did find him here. There you go. You got a lot of kilometers in. Be it resolved that public hearings be adjourned and regular council reconvene. Mover.
Ryan.
Marvin?
Ryan got it. Marvin got the second. All in favor?
Yay.
Carried. That takes us to other business today and our community spotlight.
Seems to have
Seems to
Left
have vanished.
building.
vanished.
We may have taken this too long.
We might have.
Did you talk to her out there?
Should I see if is she out there?
I didn't see her out there, no. I was in the lunchroom for a while too after my walk.
We'll do a quick peek and just see.
I'm pretty sure she left.
What's she here? I didn't even see her.
She may have left when I was in the lunchroom. I walked for 40 minutes and then I sat in the lunchroom for a while, had a bottle of water and
Okay.
relaxed. Had lunch.
She got tired of us.
Seeing that we don't have our community spotlight here this evening, I will ask if there's any questions from the media or public relevant to this meeting of council. Not seeing any. We will then move forward. Be it resolved that this regular meeting of council recess for the purpose of holding an in-camera meeting of a preliminary nature. Mover.
Peter?
Second.
Michael?
Michael. All in favor? Carried.
Yay.
I will thank everyone for coming and hanging out here this evening. Those of us that are going to stick around for the in-camera session, we will.
It up to shut it down?
Be it resolved that the in-camera meeting be adjourned and regular council reconvene. Mover.
Michael?
Second.
Ryan.
All in favor? Carried.
Yay.
Marvin's still there.
Be it resolved that this regular meeting of council be adjourned. Marvin, would you like to move that?
Yay.
A second?
I can do that.
Peter got the second. All in favor? That is carried.
Thanks,
Good night.